and the way that we continue to do the work that we're doing and Pastor Tim is doing is through the support of sponsors and donors. So if you're able to, that's awesome. If you want to learn a little bit more online, you can do that at ourwatchnow.com. You can also give there. It's ourwatchnow.com/donate. Make sure to follow on all the social sites if you haven't already while we're still there before we get taken down. Hopefully not, but you know how things have been going lately. Pastor Tim can be found and Our Watch can be found on YouTube, so make sure you subscribe and follow there for all the video content. Also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And like I said, the website has all kinds of great information for you there as well. So we're going to be getting started here in just a moment, so sit back and relax and enjoy Our Watch with Tim Thompson.
This past year, the radical left with their globalist mindset has burned down our cities, forced businesses to close, and tried to silence our churches. They told us to wear a mask and stay home to save lives, and many Christians remain silent. That is no longer an option. The silent majority will be silent no more, and the sleeping giant has been awakened. We are going to use our voice to take back the media, stop the censorship, and very loudly take back the public square. I'm Tim Thompson, and this is Our Watch.
Everybody, good to see you guys here tonight. So grateful that you all came out. Want to say hello to everybody that is tuned in online. Welcome to Our Watch with Tim Thompson. Glad you guys are with us. And just really excited to talk with our guest tonight. We've got a lot of different issues that we're going to go over with him, but you'll see how all of these issues that we go over are actually all tied together. They're all connected. And I can just tell you that we are in a spiritual battle. In fact, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. You guys kind of feel that, don't you? I mean, there's this understanding that we really, truly are in a spiritual battle, and the world has its way of describing the spiritual battle, but for those of us that have a Judeo-Christian mindset, those of us that allow this book right here to be what guides our worldview, we see it through the lens of God's Word, and empowered by the Spirit of God, we see what it truly is, and this is a clear fight between good and evil, a fight between God and really Satan is out for our souls. And the thing is, Satan doesn't stand a chance. Greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. We aren't fighting for victory, we're fighting from it. And so we're pretty excited if we really are honest with ourselves. As Christians, we know that the times we're living in are times God is going to do some incredible things in us and through us. We just have to have the spiritual eyes to see those opportunities and then the spiritual boldness to seize those opportunities. So exciting times indeed. I want to introduce our guest tonight. Our guest is a New Zealand author, speaker, political activist, and blogger. He is the author of 3 self-published books on U.S. politics and was featured in a 2016 documentary entitled Enemies Within, and he also writes for the Epoch Times. Please welcome out our guest, Trevor Loudon. Trevor, welcome back to the show here. Glad you're with us.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. It's
Yeah.
a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's it's always a blessing for me to hear your perspective on the things that are going on. As I said before we welcomed you out, there's a spiritual battle that we are in. And Satan would love nothing more than to just steal our joy and make us walk around with this feeling of defeat. But I actually gave a message just recently that it's in those times of defeat where you have to just step back and regroup and reformulate a new plan. What you're doing isn't working, so you got to do something different. And truly, that's kind of where we're at. Don't you believe me?
Look, absolutely. You know, if we were doing everything right, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now. So this mess has told us we're not doing things right. We better reevaluate and move forward in a different direction. So that's a blessing in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you said it's a blessing in itself. If we can have that type of attitude, take it from that perspective of going, okay, all right, Lord. So we just need to regroup and do things different. Okay, this is a blessing. God guides us as we move along this thing we call life. So you've already done one documentary. If you guys haven't watched The Enemies Within, really highly recommend that you go and watch that film. It's an incredible film, but I want to talk tonight about your new film that you have comes out just after Easter.
Yeah, well, it's April at this stage, so
Okay.
yeah, it's not far away now. It's in post-editing now. We're getting the final cut soon. Have to do a few tweaks, but it's not far away now.
Okay, for anybody here who may not have heard about it, just kind of give us the synopsis. What's this movie about?
Well, our first movie was Enemies Within, which was really the enemies in politics in this country. And we do have copies out the back too, by the way, for after.
Awesome. Make sure you guys get one. This thing is great, I'm telling you.
But if you look at, if you were an enemy of America, what would you want to infiltrate? If you look at the churches are the backbone of this country. And if you hated America, you wanted to bring America down, would you not try to infiltrate the churches and twist the churches, move them towards socialism, away from, Orthodox Christianity, into something different? Well, the movie is about the forces that have been penetrating the churches in this country right from the beginning of the 20th century. So it's a little bit historical, but it's going right into the forces doing it now. The forces who are getting into the evangelical churches, the Southern Baptists, and they are promoting their social justice and their critical race theory and their Marxism and selling it as Christianity. And it's doing a huge amount of damage.
There's been, you talk about the history of it. For people who don't know the history, maybe if you could give them one key thing that really began this, that brought it into the church, could you pinpoint it to one?
Well, the very first communist front in America was the Methodist Committee for Social Action. The communists use front groups because nobody will vote for a communist or support a communist plan. So they have front groups that have nice sounding names. The Methodist Committee for Social Action. Doesn't that sound a noble organization?
Right.
But that is what they used to bring communism into the Methodist Church. It spread to most of the mainstream Protestant churches. And now most of them are basically the Communist Party at prayer, to be honest. And now they're coming into the evangelical churches because the evangelicals are the last bastion of real Christianity in this country.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. So as we've seen this seep into the church, I've watched it over my lifetime, and I'm 45 years old. So I'm not, I haven't living in the 30s or 40s like maybe some of our audience, I don't know. But just in my time, I've watched it, I've seen it. It's one of those things where I can look back just over the last several decades, and I can pinpoint several things where we've watched this social justice gospel enter the church, and critical race theory has entered the church. All the critical theories have entered the church, and these are all tools of the Marxist, and it's very abundantly clear for anybody who has spiritual eyes to look at what's going on. It is very clear that this is a very strategic attack against the church, and in many ways the church has failed. I've talked about this, that over the last year we've watched God reach out of eternity, grab the church, kind of shake the church and say, wake up. And we're watching how the church has responded. In many ways the church has responded just like the world. You look at the church and look at the world, we're supposed to come out from among them and be holy. We're supposed to be separate and different, and yet we look a lot like the rest of the world. There is no difference.
Well, that's unfortunately the case. The churches, for 1600 years, from the time Christianity really became the dominant religion in the Western world, the church was the leading aspect of society. Any culture you went into, whether it was France or Germany or colonial America, the church was the leading part of the community. That's where people look to for guidance, for a moral compass, for political guidance. Well, it's only been in the last 60 years that the church has abandoned that. And if you look at the last 60 years, has society got better in that time? Have we really made a whole bunch of progress? Has the drug problem gone down? Have social issues faded away? Has the church faded away? As the church has abandoned its leadership role, and that's really accelerated since the 1960s, all the social markers have deteriorated. And that's no accident. And part of that is just laziness and cowardice, but part of it has been deliberately fostered by the hard left to take away their main opposition.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to run through, if I could, just a few news stories. Things are kind of happening around us right now, and we'll talk about how this is all part of that same strategy. First thing is this. So Biden's Justice Department drops a lawsuit that was filed against Yale University. This is a discrimination suit against the Asian American and white applicants. So here they are with this supposedly very diverse way of doing things, and they're not racist. They're not judging people based on the color of their skin, and yet in many ways they actually are. It just depends on what color your skin is. So here's what this article says. It says, in an unexpected move, the Department of Justice gave notice to a federal court on February 3rd, which is today, that is dropping a discrimination lawsuit it filed only a few months ago. In a 2-sentence notice, the DOJ described its decision as a voluntary dismissal of the litigation it filed in October 2020 following a 2-year investigation. Now, Edward Blum, he's the president of Students for Fair Admissions. He issued a statement today saying this. He said, "It's disappointing that the DOJ withdrew from the important lawsuit which had exposed Yale's illegal use of quotas to achieve racial and ethnic proportionality. His group has been a leading opponent in the courts and the media of racial and ethnic favoritism in college admissions. He said in his statement that his group plans to file a new lawsuit against Yale in the coming days. Discriminatory admissions policies like Yale's must be challenged in federal court." Is this part of that critical race theory that's entered our school systems and our universities?
Absolutely, because what Yale and other universities were doing is they were marking down Asian and white students and marking up black and Latino students. So the Asian students, they have very strong education culture. They tend to do very well in exams. So say there was 15% of Asian students applied for Harvard. Well, normally 15% would get in, but they would cut that back to 10% so they could admit more black students, more Latino students, because they had to have the same proportion in the population in their colleges. So the Asians who would blitz the exams were being penalized, and other students who didn't do so well were being advantaged. And so the Trump Justice Department filed a lawsuit against that to basically force admission on merit alone, which it should be. And now the Biden administration has dropped that, so Yale can go back to its discriminatory policies, favoring some groups over another. Now, if you want to cause resentment in society, can you think of a better way to do it? If you have families, if you want to cause resentment and hatred in your families, you favor one child over another. See how that goes. That's what they're doing.
Right. Now, we look at what's going on in our culture, and it's strikingly similar to the first time Jesus came. So the first time Jesus came, he got mad at who? Anybody guess? The Pharisees. Pharisees were the religious leaders. Jesus got upset at those religious leaders. He said, you know what? You guys know how to look at the sky. You know how to look at the clouds. You can tell that a storm's coming. You can see that it's going to rain. You can discern the signs that are in the skies as to what the weather's doing. You should have known I was coming. He was very upset that they didn't realize, and they literally, they should have been able and could have, if they would have been paying attention, could have calculated it down to the exact day. And yet they didn't do it. And now where are we now? We fast forward to now, we're anticipating his second return, his return. He's been here once, he's coming back. We're anticipating this. He's given us another long list of things we're supposed to look for. Number one thing is we're supposed to make sure we don't get deceived. But in there, in a lot of these things, one of them is that nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. That word nation is ethnos. So it's ethnos against ethnos. Sound a lot like our English word ethnicity. That's where we get this from. So ethnic group is going to rise up. When have you seen ethnic group versus ethnic group pushed on society into every single aspect of our society worldwide? And it has now crept into the church, and that is what you're exposing.
Yeah, critical race theory, this obsession with race that you see in many churches, that is what they call critical race theory. Now, the old Marxist paradigm was that the working class would rise up and take the wealth of the capitalists. But that doesn't work very well in America because you don't have a very strong class structure in America. But race is always with you. So the Marxists decided, especially the pro-Chinese ones, decided that they would use racial differences and exacerbate those to achieve revolution. So in the old days, it was the workers would rise up and take the wealth of the bosses. Now it is the oppressed peoples of color, and you can be a multi-millionaire football player, and if you're black, you're still an oppressed person of color. They will rise up and take away the power of the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. So this is just a new form of revolution utilizing race rather than class. And you have Christian churches all over this country taking a knee and kowtowing to these Marxist revolutionaries aligned with communist China who are there to bring this country to its knees. And you have all these churches trying to outdo each other and virtue signaling just how anti-racist we are. Well, it's a very simple way to deal with racism. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. That's really all you need to know.
Right. And you think about the spiritual leaders of our time. Look at the pastors across the world. They should be able to look at that list and go, So Jesus said that about the time he's coming back, ethnic group's going to rise up against ethnic group, and there's going to be pitting them against one another. Worldwide, this is going to happen. There's going to be pestilence, in other words, pandemics. These things are going to be happening worldwide. Earthquakes, worldwide. People being massively deceived, worldwide. Make sure you don't get deceived. Make sure you know the signs of the times. Look at what's going on. I can only imagine that when Jesus gets back, he's going to look at the pastors, the spiritual leaders, just like he looked at the Pharisees when he came the first time, said, shame on you, you should have known. Then here's the thing. Shame on me? No, I know. No, and I know because I'm very simple in how I approach this. If Jesus said it, I believe it. It's that simple. Jesus said that about the time he comes back, these things are going to be happening, and they're happening right now, right in front of us. And these pastors, for some reason, not that all pastors, there's a lot of pastors that do see it. When Jesus came the first time, there was a lot of Pharisees that did, but most didn't. Okay? And that's kind of where we're at now, is there's some good pastors, there's some good churches out there, but what you're uncovering is that there's a lot that are really bought into this Marxist ideology.
Well, back in Jesus' time, the Pharisees were the spiritual leaders of the nation. Theoretically, they were the wise, learned people.
Yeah.
And so people looked to them for leadership. Well, people now are looking to the pastors for leadership. And with a few noble exceptions, they're not getting a lot of it. Because you have Christian pastors who are either saying nothing when the country is dissolving around them into chaos, They're saying nothing, or some of them are actively encouraging it. Some of them have actually bought into this. So, a lot of people go to church and they think, I want to go to church. They go to the nearest church and they learn about critical race theory and global warming and social justice. And they think that's Christianity. They have no idea of what they have walked into. And that's happening in thousands of churches across this nation, across the world. So what is that going to do for those people? That's a grand deception.
Right. Now, another question is, what's it going to do for the people who do know the truth and they stand for the truth? Like this student who faces disciplinary action for basically for standing up for righteousness. There's a high school student out of Illinois that's facing disciplinary hearing this week over her refusal to participate in the school's gender and sexuality program after her parents requested that she be exempt from the requirements. So the parent said, I don't want my child going through this. The child said, I'm not going to go through this. And now she's going to face disciplinary action because she didn't go through it the way she was told by her parents. National Religious Freedom legal nonprofit sent a demand letter to the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy of Aurora on Tuesday, arguing that the 3-year residential public school unlawfully denied religious accommodations to this young lady to excuse her from attending the school's student gender and sexuality program. What's going to happen when Christians that know what God says about how to live start to stand for God?
Well, you could see, if you walked into any public school in California and said, I want you to remove your sexuality programs, stop teaching kids about the 57 genders and, that they can have a sex change when they're 12 and abortion when they're 13 and the parents shouldn't know. You walk into any public school in this state and try and push that line and see what happens to you. You'll have the unions and probably the legal profession on your case pretty quickly. You look at what the Nazis did, the communists did. The first thing they always tried to do is get control of the children. I've got the old-fashioned view that until a child turns an adult, he or she is my property. As a parent, I have full responsibility for my child until they are an adult. But that is not the socialist way. They want your kids from the time they can open their eyes, so they can, educate them in what they want rather than let you brainwash them in old-fashioned ideas like Christianity or, justice or the American Constitution or patriotism. Any of that old-fashioned stuff, that's got to go. So, and now we're seeing the full effect of the law being applied to parents who just want to be responsible parents and keep their kids away from things that are going to do them damage, psychological damage. Right. So what a reversal. Parents are being penalized for protecting their children. And they get basically, otherwise you've got to allow your children to be, the American government, the education system in this country is the biggest bunch of child molesters that we have. Mm-hmm. The psychological damage they're doing to our children is just beyond shocking.
Absolutely. And it's weird when you look at what they're teaching kids. When I was a kid, there was sex ed. There was sperm meets egg. Then it starts to divide, attaches to a uterus. There's the science behind it, the biology. That's not what they're teaching. When they talk about sex ed, it's not sex ed anymore. Now it's sexuality training. So it's not about the biology of it. It's about the ideology of it now. Now it's pushing everything that is against what God said in His Word. And they're talking about reproductive health. If you guys haven't checked out teensource.org, I highly recommend you check it out. Teensource.org, you can sign up, and you have to lie a little bit. So I'm telling Christians to lie, but I lied, and I get my updates from them every single week. They think you're a kid signing up, and they send out a weekly thing so that way kids know how to be healthy sexually. This week, so every Wednesday they put something out. This week is February's Black History Month, a month dedicated to recognizing and acknowledging the contributions of Black Americans throughout our history. So this is how they can be sexually healthy. They have to know about black history. But it goes on to talk about reproductive justice being a framework based on the idea that it's a human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and the parent can have a safe and sustainable communities. And anybody who knows about what's going on with the Marxist ideology in America knows that they're talking about sustainability and human, bodily autonomy. These are all key words that they use.
Well, we used to have sustainable families. There was a mother and a father, and the father usually had a job, and the mother would look after the kids and educate the children, and the father would discipline the children, and the mother would nurture them and be kind, and it worked for a very long time. It was quite a successful model. And that is completely opposite to the Marxist paradigm. The Marxists believe in the abolition of family. Black Lives Matter believes in the abolition of family. Well, what has the abolition of family done for the black communities of this country over the last 50 years, folks? The black communities in this country used to have lower illegitimacy rates, lower divorce rates, and higher church-going rates than the white communities. The socialists got amongst them, and look what they have achieved. But, what you're saying, Pastor Tim, these things are happening in our public schools today. Kids are being psychologically tortured. Yet how many pastors do you see ever talk about this on Sunday? How many of them do actually take delegations to the Board of Education demanding an end to this cruelty? How many pastors are standing up against this? Some of the greatest cruelty that's happening in our society, and most people are ignoring it.
Yeah, it really is quite sad to watch. Mixed through all of this stuff, we're watching it creep into the church in a very disturbing way. But because not everybody that comes here on Wednesday night comes here to church, and definitely not all of our online viewers come here to church. How can they spot this? If they're going to their church, how can they spot it? And once they spot it, if it does happen to be happening in their church, what do they do about it?
Well, so you go into a church and you have a pastor, and he starts talking about the greatest threat to the church is racism, that we have to greatly emphasize social justice. Justice shouldn't need a qualifier. Justice is justice. And they start talking about, we got to get out there and welcome refugees across the border. We've got to be accepting of people no matter what their sin is. We've got to bring them in with no conditions. You're in a communist church if that's what's going on. And there's no point going to a meeting like this on a Wednesday night and going to a communist church on a Sunday. It's not going to do you a lot of good. So you've got to really look at what's being taught in your church. You've got to look at your Bible and make comparisons. Is this biblical? Is this not? If it's not, you go to your pastor. You discuss it with your pastor. You see if he's just a little bit confused. You go to your elders. You talk about this. And if they think, if they come up, okay, we'll listen. Let's examine this. They brought this program in. They told us it was good. We haven't really examined it. We'll reevaluate it. If they're serious about that, stick with the church and try and get them through it. But if they ignore what you're saying, if they laugh at you or ignore you or break appointments, they are not serious about fixing the problem. They are either apathetic or they are part of the problem. And you've got to look for your own self-interest and the interest of your families should you still be committed to that church. You might have good social networks there. You might have a lot of friends there. But you don't get to heaven with a social club. There's plenty of social clubs out there. Go and join one of them if that's all you're after. But if you're coming to church as a serious attempt to get to know God better and God's word better, you've got to be very discerning about what you've been taught and willing to challenge the pastor, challenge the elders, challenge the other people in the church if you think they've gone astray. And if you really try and you can't succeed, you need, for your own well-being, to get somewhere where you can learn the truth.
Yes. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned the idea of a social club, and there's a quote that actually Bob Tyler from Advocates for Faith and Freedom, the religious liberties attorney, he often quotes this. It's Martin Luther King Jr. He says, this is what Martin Luther King Jr. said. He said, "The church must be reminded that it is not the master nor the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority."
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said before, the churches used to be the leading component in society. That was a given. Everybody looked to the church. You know, we were given the church, we were given the family, and we were given civil government. Those three institutions were to, working in harmony, should guarantee a free and prosperous society. But if the church should be the leading component of that. But if the church fails, the family falls into chaos, the government gets bigger, starts to take control of the family, and then takes control of the church. And the church becomes an organ of the state. Just like in Nazi Germany, when all those German Christians put swastikas in their churches, they allowed their kids to be indoctrinated, to become good little Nazis, to go and kill people happily for Hitler. You know, we heard a story today, Pastor Tim, about a church, a little church in Germany, and they had a railway station going right past it, a railway line going right past it, and one day a train stopped outside. And this was going to Dachau. It had Jews, a whole lot of Jews in the compartments, and they heard them screaming and yelling. So what did the people in the church do? They sung louder. You know, how would you like to have that on your conscience when you came to meet your Maker?
Yeah. Well, we're badly in need of spiritual leaders that won't lead like that. Badly in need of it. We're badly in need of spiritual leaders that will see what's going on in our society. I want to share a quick video with you guys. It's actually a video put on by the Capital Resource Institute. Karen England from that organization will be out here next week. But I want to show you this quick video they did, and then we'll talk about it.
Sex ed in public schools is no longer simply about the birds and the bees. And it's not just for teenagers. For example, a second grader may find themselves in a vocabulary lesson that looks something like this. And if you find it troubling that our educators believe it necessary to have a 7-year-old identify sexual anatomy in such detail, this is just the beginning. In another curriculum, students are being taught that their biological sex may not correspond to their gender identity, asserting that they may actually have been born in the wrong body. Meanwhile, the lesson teaches that traditional gender roles or gender expressions are socially constructed and have no bearing on biology. Finally, sexual orientation is the spectrum on which people identify who they are romantically and sexually attracted to. To make matters worse, students have been asked to articulate how they identify on these spectrums in front of their peers. Theories that were once limited to gender studies programs in universities are now being presented as fact in our public schools and are changing the lives of our children. But this is just a small sample of the content that is being exposed to our children. There is much more. Sexual acts and positions are being described and depicted. Traditional religious parents are depicted negatively. Students are trained to be an LGBT+ ally, and Planned Parenthood, which also has a curriculum in public schools, is presenting abortion as a normal part of life. So, what is to be done? Go to capitalresource.org, where you can learn more, opt out, and learn how to make a difference in your local public school.
So I'll give just a warning for you parents. It is going to be a bit, or it has the potential at least to be a bit graphic next week as we talk about some of the things that are being discussed in public classrooms. Now, I'm saying that to a group of mainly adults here, but you have to know that. But a lot of this stuff is being taught to children. And there is a push, it's a massive push in this, is the transgender movement. And you see it in almost every single one of the policies of this new administration. Regardless if the policy has something to do with gender at all, I mean, it could have to do with farming, and they will find a way to stick the transgender movement in it. It's in everything. And it's obvious, like for us as spiritual, born of God's Spirit, as we watch these things take place, it's very clear that because that's a common thread, there is some sort of spiritual aspect behind it, and it's definitely playing out in this Marxist way of taking over a country. So why are they going after the gender like that? From your perspective, why is that such a big thing for them?
Well, like a person, we are individuals. That means something that can no longer be divided. We are individual people, and we have identities. We have our family identity, we have our cultural identity, but the most fundamental thing is our gender identity. Are you a man or are you a woman? Well, that has certain implications. And that, if you are comfortable with what you are, you know what you are, you know what your roles are, you know your potentials, you can be a healthy, productive, and strong individual. But if you're confused about your very sexuality, if you don't even know there is a sexual standard, you know what it's like being a teenager. It ain't easy. There's a lot of pressures, there's a lot of confusion as you're growing up and you're maturing. Well, you throw all that gender identity stuff in there, you're going to damage people psychologically for life. You're going to weaken them. And what does the revolution want? It wants a lot of weak people who can't fight back. You imagine these young kids, 15, young 18-year-old kids who've been through gender identity and transgenderism and questioning their sexuality, and then you put them in uniform and get them to storm the beach at Normandy. See how that goes. You ended World War II because young American Christians who'd grown up on farms and were pretty darn tough and pretty resourceful and pretty committed took their lives in their hands to liberate other people. I think that's a very Christian thing to do. Well, you have so degraded the young people of this nation by the psychological torture, this breaking down of identity. If we ever have another war like that, I would be very, very worried about how we could even hope to win it. We're the safe spaces at the beach at Normandy. How do you stop for a break? And, if you get a bit upset, you got to, have a little bit of a cuddle. While the machine guns are strafing all around you.
You know, a pony to pet.
A pony to pet, Mike, you talk about microaggression. Well, you're getting machine gunned and strafed when you're charging up a beach. That's a bit more than a microaggression. And if these young kids can't handle microaggressions, how are they going to handle that? But how are they going to grow up to be good mothers and fathers? How are they going to understand their roles and be strong in their roles? An ideal family has a strong father and a strong mother, both very sure of what they are, what their roles are, and they both have a role to teach their children. If you've got all this confusion going on, what kind of families is that going to produce in the future? This is basically a Marxist plan to totally degrade the population to the point it can no longer defend itself or stand up for itself or do the tough things necessary for a society to survive. It's an enemy attack. It's actually a military operation in many ways.
Right. Yeah, and when we look at it as, from the Christian perspective of what's happening, we can go all the way back to the book of Genesis. Okay, because in the beginning, God created. So we're kicking him out of his role as creator. He's the one that's created everything. In the beginning, he created humanity in his own image, which they want to cover. Okay, they created us I was created in God's image, and he created us male and female. He created the father, the mother, the child, that whole family structure. He created the fact that there is right and wrong, that there's a consequence to transgressing his laws, And the only way to be covered, the only way to have those transgressions covered is by the shedding of innocent blood. All that was from the very beginning. And all of those things are what's under attack right now, if we have the spiritual eyes to see it. That this is just an outright assault on God's word. That's what it is. And we're watching this play out where they pushing the whole transgender ideology. This is the occult. Androgyny is the highest form, androgyny where it's neither male nor female, which is where we're going with the whole transgender thing. We'll talk about that next week, but the whole idea is not that a man can be a woman or a woman can be a man, but you can be nothing. That's where they're pushing this now. It's just infinite number of genders where you don't even have to decide I'm a male or a female. I'm just something else. And that's what this is. And they're telling kids these kind of things. So yeah, I mean, they're getting them while they're very young and confusing them. And they're going to live a confused life because of that. And what we're watching in that as well is it's a sexualization of children. And because there's a sexualization of children, we're breeding a predatory environment in our school system. And I've been saying this for a long time. People don't like it. That just makes me nervous. Don't talk about our teachers that way. Look, I get there's some good teachers out there. There's a whole lot of crappy teachers. Okay, there really are. Are there pedophiles in our public school system? You better believe there are. What kind of a grown man talks to a 2 or a second grader about their sexuality? That's weird. I didn't talk to my daughter or my son when they were in second grade about their sexuality because they were too little. Why? What's some man in a public school want to talk to our children about that kind of stuff for? There's an article that came out about these 64 people that were arrested, 2 women rescued during sex trafficking operation right here in California. So 64 people arrested, 2 women rescued right here in Riverside County. And I say thank you so much to District Attorney Mike Hestron and Sheriff Chad Bianco. Because those are 2 men that will not put up with this type of assault on our women and our children. And this is what's going on. And I appreciate also out in Orange County, this is what the Orange County District Attorney said. No matter how many ways predators continue to try to disguise their sexual abuse of children, the Orange County District Attorney's Office and our law enforcement partners will never stop protecting these vulnerable victims. We're breeding this type of environment where children are going to be exploited. And it sickens me to no end.
Well, you imagine, Tim, and some people might not believe this, within 5 to 10 years, on current patterns, you will see a big movement in this country to legalize pedophilia. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you do then? Right now, you can at least use the law to keep deviants away from your kids. But what do you do when some 18-year-old guy wants to start hanging around with your 7-year-old daughter? What do you do?
Or son.
Or son.
Yeah.
What do you do when it's legal? And and if the school knows about it, they probably don't have to tell you about it. Just like they don't have to tell you about abortions or medications that are happening now with young girls. So if you think that's far-fetched, well, if I told you 10 years ago that 25% of California kids weren't sure of their own sexual identity, you would have thought I was crazy. They are moving towards the legalization of pedophilia. And if you think it's bad now, you try and cope with that.
Yeah, well, it's making it abundantly clear that what we're doing isn't working. That's what it's showing us. This is a feeling of great defeat, but it's in those times of great defeat where it's time to regroup. It's time to have a new plan, and we can't keep spinning our wheels. We can't keep doing things the same way we've always done. We can't keep doing church the same way we've always done. We can't keep doing politics the same way we've always done. Pastors certainly can't stay out of politics the way they've always done because they have politicized every biblical moral issue you can think of. That's what's happened. And we can't sit idly by anymore. This is something that every Bible-believing person needs to engage in because our children and our grandchildren depend upon it.
Look, absolutely. And if you don't care about your own future, that's one thing. But if you don't care about your kids and your grandchildren, why were you ever a parent? If you are not prepared to fight for them, what are people... I say to people when I do my political talks, I say, why do you fight for America? Why do you get out and you put up yard signs and you donate money and you're always going to meetings? Why do you do it? I say, is it right that it's for two things? Because you love your country and you love your kids. And they'll say, exactly, that's why I do it. I love my kids. Well, your kids, you know that your kids are under huge threat right now. Your grandchildren are under huge threat. And if you won't stand up to fight for them, who will you fight for? You know, how can anybody allow their children to be sent into these systems?
Yeah. Well, homeschooling is a really good option, you guys. Really good option. I'm going to give you guys some hope, hopefully, here in just a second, and then I'm going to ask you to go ahead and leave them with some encouragement. Hopefully this is some hope for you. First of all, like I've been saying, we're not fighting for victory, we're fighting from it. As believers in Christ, as we've entered into Christ, we've already won. Yeah, we have battles, we have trials, we have tribulations, but in the end, Jesus wins, and we're with him in that. So just take courage in that, but also understand that we're watching one of two things. I've got my book coming out this month, and I'm excited to share that with you guys, but in that, I talk about the fact that we're watching one of two things take place right now. We are either about to see the rapture of the church, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where this is what God does. He sends his son, Jesus, back. He doesn't come all the way back to this earth at that point. He's in the clouds, but he resurrects the dead to life. Those of us who are alive and remain, we are transformed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, according to 1 Corinthians 15, and we are caught up to be with him, and there we will be with the Lord forever. Amen. Praise the Lord. I can't wait. So it's either that, or because he's awakened the church, we're in the beginning stages of the fifth and final Great Awakening here in America. That'll be it. Because the reason is, you can't go back to sleep. You cannot stick your head back in the proverbial sand. You're awake. God has awoken you for a reason, and it's not to be ineffective. He's awakened the church because there's either he's going to rapture us, or he has a great work for us. And if he has that great work for us, he's going to empower us. He's going to encourage us. He's going to embolden us. He's going to give us every opportunity we need and every bit of protection we need. Amen? Amen. All right. Follow that, Trevor.
Yeah,
Give us some encouragement.
Well, look. See, this is a verse.
That wasn't fair, was it?
No, that's okay. That's okay. This is a verse I've been reading lately. It's James 4:17. Whoever knows what is right but does not do it, for him it is a sin. Okay? So sin isn't just stealing or beating people up or ripping things off or whatever. It's when you know there's something right in front of you that is the right thing to do and you don't do it. Because that shows a lack of faith, doesn't it? It shows you don't really believe in right or wrong. You don't really believe there are consequences for right and wrong. So we're living in a world where I think people are going to be tested more than we have for a very, very long time. See, those German Christians who put swastikas in their churches and went along with the Nazis, do you think their church going was really setting them up for heaven? You know, I'm sure they all thought they were going to go to heaven. Well, we're living in a time now where we're going to be really tested. We're going to have big moral decisions. We're going to be asked to be courageous, to say things we've never said before, to do things we've never done before. Well, that's exciting, but it's a little bit scary, right? But if you have faith in good and have a hatred for evil, you're in a time now where you're going to have to do that scary stuff. But when you do scary stuff and you win and you develop as a person, you deepen your faith, I think that's the richest kind of experience you can have in your life. You know, you ask anybody who's been through a war, what was the most exciting time of my life? Where did I make the very best friends of my life? When I was in the trenches, we were together fighting for a righteous cause, and we were looking out for each other and backing each other up, and we were scared all the time, but we still had to go and charge over the trench and charge up the hill. people look back on those times as the deepest times of their lives. Well, we're coming into it. I'm not asking you to charge up into machine guns, but we're coming into a time where we're going to be very, very tested. Socially, politically, spiritually, the whole lot. We're going to find out who our friends really are. We're going to find out how committed we are to the truth. How are we going to fold at the first time, or are we going to summon the courage that's within us and have the faith that we need to do what's right? I think that's a blessing. I would rather live in that time than just some sterile life where I get a job, I get married, I have some kids, and I die. You know, I'm not knocking that, but it's good. We like that, some of that. But we're living in a very interesting time where we're going to be tested spiritually like the previous generations haven't. We're living in a time we're going to see changes that we can't begin to imagine. And we've got to fortify ourselves. And we're going to have to be courageous, and we're going to have to step out of the box. But I see that as a great opportunity. That is a very exciting time to be alive. And think of the sweet victories that we will achieve on the way. And think of we are following what we know to be right with a lot of challenges. That is testing you spiritually like you've never been tested before. And when you are tested, you grow spiritually. You know, you're not just going through life where you're never ever tested, you're never challenged, you just go through a comfortable life and then you die. Well, that's not our fate, people. We're not going to have that. We're going to be tested, we're going to find out who our friends are, we're going to make great friends, and we're going to have a chance to really grow spiritually. And I think that's something to look forward to.
That is some amazing encouragement, Trevor. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
He's got copies of his book and his DVD out here, and then we'll talk more as we come close to April.
Yep.
As the Enemies Within the Church comes out. But exciting times we're living in. To quote a friend of mine that's here tonight, I've been waiting for Christianity like this. So, this is a time where God is going to do some incredible things. So thank you so much for everybody coming out tonight. It's really been a blessing to see all of you. I want to say thank you to all of our online audience. We love that you are here with us, and we just wish blessings upon you and your family. So God bless you guys. We'll see you next week.